"You're old, Eleanor. You don't need a $5 million house. Just sign it over to us." That was the sentence that shattered the quiet rhythm of my morning coffee. My son-in-law David didn't even look embarrassed when he said it. He stood there in my kitchen sunlight, pouring across the marble counter arms, crossed like he owned the place already. I remember the smell of the ocean drifting through the open glass doors, the sound of waves below the cliff. For 32 years, that view had been my peace, the last piece of my husband left behind after he passed from lung cancer. Now, it felt like the beginning of a war. "You're serious?" I asked, setting down my cup, careful not to let my hands tremble. He smirked. "You can't live here alone forever. And Emily and I are planning to start a family. You know how expensive things are in Santa Barbara. We'd take care of the house. You could move into a smaller place, maybe one of those nice retirement communities by the park." I almost laughed. Retirement community. That's what they call nursing homes now, the place people send you to fade quietly while they measure what's left of your estate. I took a slow breath. "Does Emily feel the same way?" He hesitated just for a second. That pause told me everything. My daughter, my only child, didn't have the courage to ask me herself. She sent her husband to do it. I remember when David first met Emily. He was charming, ambitious, always talking about his startup. The kind of man who orders for everyone at a restaurant, but calls it being helpful. I had my doubts, but Emily was in love, and I didn't want to be the overprotective mother. Now, years later, that same man stood in the kitchen I had decorated with my husband, the same tiles we'd chosen together from a little store in Ventura, and demanded the deed to my house. "You've done well for yourself, Eleanor," he continued, pacing the room. "But think about Emily's future. You could sign the house over now, avoid the estate taxes later. We'd even let you stay here for a while. Let me stay." Those words echoed in my head like the crashing of the waves outside. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him about the nights I worked 2 jobs while Emily was in college, about how her father and I skipped vacations to pay off the mortgage early. But instead, I smiled that polite, brittle smile older women perfect after years of swallowing disappointment. "I'll think about it," I said. He grinned, patting the marble counter as if marking territory. "Good. We can talk about it over dinner. Emily wants to host this weekend. She said you haven't been over in a while." I watched him leave through the front door, his luxury SUV glinting in the driveway that my husband once used to wash his old Chevy on Sunday afternoons. When the sound of the engine faded, I sat back down and stared at the deed folder on the kitchen shelf. My husband's signature was still there, strong, steady, the ink slightly faded but permanent. $5 million, I whispered to the empty room. That's what I'm worth to them. Outside, a seagull landed on the railing, staring at me as if it understood. Maybe I looked like every other old woman who had given too much and been left with too little. But what David didn't know, what Emily had forgotten, was that I wasn't just some fragile widow clinging to memories. This house wasn't just my home. It was my story. And if they wanted to take it from me, they'd have to learn the one lesson my husband always believed in. You don't steal from someone who built their own foundation. That night, as I locked the doors and turned off the lights, I could still hear David's voice echoing in my head. "You don't need this house." Maybe he was right. Maybe I didn't need it. But I knew one thing for certain. If I ever gave it to him, he'd never live to enjoy it. I wasn't always the kind of woman who stayed quiet when someone crossed the line. Life just taught me that sometimes silence is louder than shouting. My name is Eleanor Carter, 67 years old, widow of a man named Frank Carter, a contractor who built half the houses you see along the Santa Barbara coast. For 38 years, we shared everything, the work, the struggle, the laughter that filled our tiny one-bedroom apartment before this house even existed. We didn't start rich. Frank was a man with calloused hands and a good heart, the kind who fixed neighbors' fences without asking for a dime. I worked as a school secretary, making $38,000 a year back in the 90s, saving every penny I could. When other families spent weekends at Disneyland, we packed sandwiches and drove to open houses not to buy, but to dream. One evening, after 15 years of saving and endless side jobs, we stood on this very cliff, looking out at the Pacific. The lot was empty then, just wild grass and wind. Frank squeezed my hand and said, "Someday this will be ours. Not because we're lucky, but because we worked harder than anyone else. We built it piece by piece. Frank handled the structure himself, every beam, every plank, every nail. I picked the paint, the windows, the kitchen tiles, the same ones David leaned against this morning like they meant nothing. When Frank passed away 8 years ago, I thought I'd sell the place. The silence was unbearable at first. No more clinking of his tools in the garage, no smell of cedar dust, no early morning hum of the coffee maker he'd wired himself. But something told me to stay. Maybe it was grief, or maybe it was faith that this home wasn't just wood and concrete. It was everything we were. I remember how Emily cried at the funeral, her hand clutching mine. She said, "Mom, I don't know what I'll do without Dad." I thought we'd grow closer after that mother and daughter leaning on each other through the pain. But people change when money whispers louder than love. Emily met David 2 years later at some tech conference in San Diego. He was handsome, polished, and a little too confident for my taste. When he shook my hand the first time, he looked around the house like he was appraising it. "Beautiful property," he said. "Prime spot." He said it like a broker, not a son-in-law. Still, I smiled. Because that's what mothers do. We hope our children choose love even when we see the warning signs flashing in neon. After they married, things changed subtly. Emily stopped coming by as often. When she did, she'd comment on the size of the place. "Mom, don't you get lonely here?" "No," I'd answer. "Your father's still everywhere in this house." She'd smile politely, the kind of smile people give when they don't understand something sacred. Last Christmas was the last time we had dinner together here. I made roast beef, mashed potatoes, her favorite lemon pie. But halfway through the meal, David pulled out his laptop, saying he had to check some numbers. Emily laughed at a message on her phone. I sat there listening to the waves, realizing how small I'd become in my own home. People my age talk about their kids taking care of them. I used to imagine Emily doing that. Maybe we'd garden together, maybe she'd stay the weekend sometimes. I never imagined she'd send her husband to ask for the deed. I've seen friends go through the same heartbreak. I remember Ruth, my neighbor from across the bluff. Her son sold her house without telling her and moved her to a nursing home 2 towns away. I visited her once. She sat by a window staring at the ocean she couldn't touch anymore. "They said it's for my safety," she told me, "but they just didn't want me in the way." That memory has haunted me ever since. I promised myself I'd never let that happen to me. As I looked around my living room that afternoon, the one filled with framed photos of Emily as a little girl, I realized how much life had changed. The little girl who used to run barefoot through this hallway was gone. In her place stood a woman who measured affection in assets. But I didn't hate her. Not yet. I still believe foolishly maybe that she was just misguided, manipulated by a man who saw my family as a stepping stone. Still, deep down, something colder was settling in, a quiet strength I hadn't felt in years. My husband once told me, "Never let anyone mistake your kindness for weakness." That night, I stood by the balcony watching the sun bleed into the sea. The air smelled of salt and pine, and the horizon burned gold. I whispered to Frank, "They think I'm too old to fight back." And somewhere in the crash of the waves below, I almost heard him answer, "Then show them what you're made of." Saturday came wrapped in fake warmth, the kind of California evening where everything looked golden from the outside but felt hollow underneath. Emily had invited me to dinner saying, "We just want to talk, Mom. It'll be nice, just family." I almost believed her. Their house sat up the hill, modern and cold, all glass and steel, no soul. When I arrived, I brought a bottle of Chardonnay, the same kind her father used to buy for special dinners. She didn't notice it. She was too busy setting the table, arranging plates like she was hosting strangers, not her own mother. David greeted me at the door with that same smug smile. "Glad you could make it, Eleanor. You look well-rested." That's how people talk to retirees when they don't know what else to say. The table was full. David's parents were there, his sister, even a couple of his business partners. I didn't realize it was more than just family until I saw the name cards at each seat. Mine said Eleanor Carter in neat printed letters. like a guest, not a mother. As we ate, the conversation stayed light at first about real estate prices, David's company, the markets. Then someone mentioned the view from my property. Your mom's place must be worth a fortune, Emily, David's sister, said, laughing as she passed the bread. Right on the cliff. God, I'd kill for that view, Emily smiled awkwardly. Yeah, it's about $5 million now, I think. David chuckled, swirling his wine. Well, technically, it'll be ours soon. We're finalizing the paperwork. The fork slipped from my hand, clinking against the plate. The room went quiet for a moment, then filled with nervous laughter. Oh, David, Emily said quickly, nudging his arm. We haven't signed anything yet. He shrugged. We will. It just makes sense. You know, consolidating assets before, taxes and stuff. Before taxes. Before I die, that's what he meant. I smiled faintly, trying to breathe through the weight in my chest. That's interesting, David. I didn't realize I'd agreed to anything. He met my eyes, unflinching. We talked about it, didn't we? You said you'd think about it. Thinking, I said softly, isn't the same as signing. There was a flicker of discomfort around the table. His mother looked away. His business partner coughed. Emily forced a laugh, trying to smooth it over. Mom, we're just trying to make things easier. You know how complicated estates can get. We don't want to fight later. We don't want to fight later. The irony stung. I'd spent my whole life fighting for her against debt, against loneliness, against the world, and now she spoke like my existence was a legal inconvenience. I tried to change the subject, asking about her work, her garden, but David wasn't done. You could move somewhere smaller, he said, closer to people your age. They have those great senior communities with gyms, ocean views. You wouldn't have to worry about upkeep. I like my house, I replied. He leaned back, smirking. Of course you do. Everyone likes expensive things. The words landed like a slap. The room went silent again, everyone pretending not to notice. Even Emily stayed quiet this time. I wanted to leave right then, but Ruth's voice came back to me, my neighbor from across the bluff. They said it's for my safety. I knew if I walked out now, they'd twist it later, make me sound senile, unreasonable. So I stayed. I smiled. I played my part. When dessert came, one of David's friends raised his glass. To the next generation, he said, and to wise parents who know when to pass the torch. The table laughed, clinking glasses. I lifted mine too, just to keep the peace, but my hand trembled slightly. As I sipped the wine, I noticed a small detail. David had placed a stack of documents on the counter near the kitchen, half hidden under his laptop. From where I sat, I could read the header, Quitclaim Deed. My stomach turned. Emily caught my gaze and quickly looked away. That tiny motion, that flicker of guilt, told me the truth. She knew. She had agreed. My throat tightened, but I didn't say a word. When dinner ended, David's father clapped me on the back. You raised a good daughter, Eleanor, and David's a smart man. He'll make sure your legacy stays in the family. Legacy. Another word that sounds kind but hides a knife. I smiled politely, thanked Emily for the dinner, and walked toward the door. The night air was cool, sharp with sea salt. As I opened my car door, I heard David's voice from inside, not meant for me. She's too proud to admit she's old. Once she realizes she can't handle it, she'll give in. I paused my hand on the car handle. I didn't turn around. I didn't shout or cry. I just looked out at the dark ocean beyond the streetlights and whispered to myself, they think they've already won. But I knew something they didn't. The one who keeps quiet the longest isn't always the weakest. Sometimes she's just waiting for the right moment to strike. The following Saturday, Emily invited me to a family celebration. It's just my birthday dinner, Mom, she said over the phone. Casual, small. Please come. Her tone was warm, forced, almost apologetic. I wanted to believe she meant it. Maybe she regretted that awful dinner. Maybe she wanted to start over. So I went. The restaurant was a fancy spot overlooking the beach, the Seabreeze Grill. I'd been there once with Frank years ago when we celebrated paying off our mortgage. Back then, the waiters knew our names. Tonight, I was just another old woman in pearls. When I walked in, I saw a long table by the window, 20 people, maybe more. Not just family colleagues, investors, friends of David's. Everyone dressed sharp, laughing loud. I spotted David's parents, his business partner, and several people I didn't recognize. Emily waved. "Mom, over here." She looked beautiful, radiant, even that effortless confidence that comes from being adored by everyone in the room. But when I got closer, her smile wavered. For a split second, I saw guilt flicker behind her eyes. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said, handing her a small box wrapped in gold paper. Inside was a vintage silver bracelet, her grandmother's. Emily took it politely but didn't open it. "Thank you, Mom," she said quickly, sliding it under the table. David appeared beside her, a wine glass in hand. "Eleanor, glad you could make it." He leaned in to kiss my cheek, but stopped short as if he didn't want to wrinkle his suit. The waiter showed me to a seat not next to Emily, not near family, but at the far end between two of David's associates. When the appetizers came, I listened to the chatter about business houses and stocks. David dominated the conversation, bragging about upgrading properties and smart transfers. He mentioned my house more than once. "Our family property's the next step," he said proudly. "Prime location. Oceanfront, just waiting for the paperwork to finalize." Someone asked, "That's your mother-in-law's place, right?" David smirked. "Technically, yeah, but it'll be in the family soon enough." Laughter rippled down the table. I felt heat rise in my chest. My fork trembled against the plate. Emily noticed but said nothing. She just sipped her wine. When the main course arrived, a man across from me, someone from David's company, smiled and said, "So, Mrs. Carter, do you ever get tired of taking care of such a big house all by yourself?" I forced a smile. "It keeps me active." David chuckled loudly, interrupting. "Active? Come on, Eleanor. You've said yourself the stairs are getting hard, right? Remember last time when you almost tripped on the patio?" The table burst into laughter again, polite but cruel. I felt something inside me crumble. "That was one time," I said softly. He raised his glass. "That's why Emily and I want to help. We don't want anything bad to happen to you, do we, sweetheart?" Emily smiled weakly. "Of course not." I looked at her, really looked. She couldn't meet my eyes. It was clear she'd chosen her side. Then came the toast. David stood tapping his glass with a spoon. To Emily, he announced the most amazing woman I know. And to our future new family, new beginnings, new home. He looked right at me when he said new home. Everyone clapped. Cameras flashed. And I sat there, trapped in the middle of the applause, my throat burning. I wanted to disappear, to vanish into the hum of the restaurant, the clatter of silverware, the ocean outside. But I didn't move. I kept my back straight, my face calm. My husband used to say, "Never let them see you break. Dignity is armor, even when it feels like a coffin." After the toast, the waiter brought a cake chocolate with gold candles. The words on top read, "To Emily and David, new chapter ahead." That was when I knew the dinner wasn't about her birthday. It was an announcement. David's friend clinked his glass again. "So when's the move-in date?" David laughed. "Once the paperwork's done. Might even remodel the place open concept, more modern." Emily's cheeks flushed. "David?" He waved her off. "What everyone knows, it's happening." He looked straight at me. "You're okay with it, right, Eleanor? It's what we talked about." The room went silent. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me. I stared down at my hands, the veins, the thin gold wedding band still circling my finger after all these years. Then I looked up straight at David. "Of course," I said calmly. "You'll have the house." Gasps rippled around the table. Emily's jaw dropped. David blinked, surprised. Yes." I smiled faintly. "You can have it. But remember something, David?" I leaned slightly forward, my voice low enough for only those near me to hear. "Just because you own something doesn't mean you'll ever belong there." For the first time all night, he had no comeback. I stood, straightened my jacket, and turned to Emily. "Happy birthday, darling." Then I walked out. As I stepped outside, the night wind from the Pacific hit my face, cold, sharp, alive. The sound of laughter followed me faintly from the restaurant, but I didn't look back. The moon hung over the ocean like a silver coin, and I thought of Frank. They think they've taken everything I whispered to him in my heart, but they've only taken the bait. Because what David didn't realize was that I'd already set my plan in motion, and soon he'd learn that some houses hold more secrets than walls. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. Betrayal doesn't strike like lightning. It seeps in, slowly, polite and legal, wrapped in words like procedure documents and just a formality. 2 weeks after that dinner, David showed up at my door with a stack of papers and a wide smile. "Eleanor," he said, his voice dripping with practiced charm, "I've got everything ready for the property transfer. We'll take care of the maintenance taxes, everything. You'll have less stress and Emily will have peace of mind." I didn't invite him in. I just stood in the doorway looking at the ocean behind him. The waves were rough that morning, churning like my stomach. "I thought we agreed I'd give you the house," I said quietly. "Not that I'd leave it." "Oh, of course," he replied, feigning sympathy. "You can stay as long as you like. It's just paperwork. For now." He emphasized the last 2 words, "for now." I glanced at the papers. The header read, "Quitclaim deed," just like I'd seen at the restaurant. The notary line was already filled in. All I had to do was sign. I wanted to slam the door in his face. But I didn't, because sometimes you win more by playing along. "I'll look it over," I said, taking the papers. He smiled, thinking he'd won. "Good. I'll send our lawyers info so you can coordinate." When he left, I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where Frank and I had signed the original mortgage 30 years ago. I ran my hand over the wood grain still faintly scratched from where Frank's tools had marked it. For a moment, I felt like a fool, like every story I'd ever heard about old women tricked out of their homes. But then I remembered something Frank once told me when we were building the house: never build something without knowing how to take it apart. That night, I called an old friend, Daniel Ruiz, our family attorney from years ago. He was retired now, living in Palm Springs, but when he heard my voice, his tone changed instantly. "Eleanor Carter," he said. "Haven't heard that name in a while. What's going on?" I told him everything: David's pressure, the dinner, the deed. He didn't interrupt, just listened like he used to in court. When I finished, there was a long silence. Finally, he said, "You still have the original title?" "Yes, in the safe. Don't sign anything, not yet. But he'll notice. Let him. The moment you sign, you give up your leverage. I'll drive up next week. We'll look at everything together." When I hung up, relief washed over me, but only for a moment. Because the next morning, Emily showed up. She didn't knock. She had a key. "Mom," she said, her voice sharp, "why are you stalling? David told me you refused to sign. Do you know how much easier this would make everything easier for who I asked? For everyone," she snapped. "You can't live here forever. The stairs, the repairs, it's too much for you. We're trying to help. By taking my home," she flinched. "You said you'd give it to us." "I said I would," I replied softly. "But giving doesn't mean surrendering." She looked frustrated, eyes darting around the house like she couldn't stand being there. "You're being unreasonable. This is what Dad would have wanted for the family to stay together. Your father wanted you to stand on your own 2 feet, I said, not on someone else's foundation. Her face hardened. "Fine. If you want to make this difficult, we'll handle it our way." And she left. 2 days later, I came home from grocery shopping to find the locks changed. At first, I thought I had the wrong key. Then I noticed the realtor's sign leaning against the porch wall, "Future home of David and Emily Lawson." My knees almost gave out. I banged on the door shouting her name, but no one answered. Through the window, I saw boxes stacked by the stairs, my things labeled Mom's. They'd moved me out without telling me. The next morning, a courier arrived with a letter from their lawyer. Effective immediately, ownership of the property located at 118 Seaview Drive has been transferred to David and Emily Lawson under quitclaim deed voluntarily executed by Eleanor Carter. But I hadn't signed anything. I tore through my papers, my desk drawers, my safe. The deed was gone. My breath caught in my throat. Someone had been inside. I called Daniel in panic. He listened carefully, then said, "If they filed forged documents, that's fraud. Don't confront them yet. Let me handle this." But before anything could happen, I got another blow, a letter from the city office. The property title had officially changed hands. In the eyes of the law, I no longer owned the house. That night, I sat in my car parked on the street outside my own home. Through the big glass windows, I could see David and Emily laughing over dinner at my table, the table where Frank used to read the newspaper where Emily had done her homework. My name was gone from the mailbox. My heart felt hollow, like the ocean had pulled everything out of me. I thought about Ruth again, my neighbor in the nursing home. I could almost hear her voice. They said it's for my safety. For a brief, ugly moment, I wondered if this was how my story would end too. But then, as I watched David pour wine into my husband's glass, the one with Frank's initials etched on it, something in me changed. Grief turned into fire. I didn't know how yet, but I knew one thing for certain: if they thought they'd stolen my life's work, they hadn't seen the real foundation yet. Because the house they thought they owned wasn't just brick and glass. It was built on secrets they didn't even know existed. When I was younger, I used to think strength meant raising your voice, fighting every battle head on. But time teaches you otherwise. Sometimes strength is keeping your mouth shut when the world expects you to scream. After the papers were stolen and the locks changed, I spent the first night in my car, parked across from my own house engine, off, wrapped in a blanket. The Pacific wind came through the cracked window, smelling of salt and rain. It was the same wind that had filled our home the night Frank and I first moved in. I remember it clearly. We didn't even have furniture yet. We sat on the floor eating Chinese takeout from paper boxes, watching the sunset through the giant glass windows we couldn't yet afford to curtain. Frank had paint on his hands, dust in his hair, and the biggest smile I'd ever seen. "It's not much yet," he said, "but it's ours." We'd worked for 20 years to afford that small piece of land. He built everything himself: the deck, the railing, even the custom cabinets in the kitchen. He used to joke that he'd hidden a piece of himself in every wall. He wasn't wrong. I still remember the night he was diagnosed with cancer. He came home from the doctor, sat at the kitchen table and said, "They gave me 2 years. We ended up getting 4. 4 long, beautiful, and cruel years." He refused to stop working. Even when the chemo made his hands shake, he'd still fix leaky pipes and tighten loose screws around the house. "If something breaks, I'll fix it," he used to say. "It's what I do." After he passed, I couldn't bring myself to touch his tools. They're still in the garage, neatly arranged, wiped clean, waiting for hands that will never come back. For months after his funeral, I'd sit by the window at night listening to the ocean and whispering to him like he could still hear me. "Frank," I'd say, "I don't know how to do this alone." And in my heart, I'd always hear his answer, "Yes, you do. You always did." That voice was what kept me going through the loneliness, through the quiet, and now through this. When I closed my eyes that night in the car, I could almost see him again, kneeling on the deck, measuring planks, that little pencil behind his ear. "You built this house with me," I whispered, "and they think they can take it away with a signature." Somewhere inside me, a calm settled in. Not peace, not yet, but clarity. The next morning, I went to the beach below the cliff. I hadn't been down there in years. The tide was high, the rocks slicked the air, cold and biting, but I climbed down anyway. I needed to remember who I was before the world decided I was old and harmless. I thought about the long years Frank and I had struggled, the time the bank almost took our first home, the nights I stayed up balancing bills, the winter we couldn't afford heat, but still found a way to laugh. Back then, I learned something that most people never do, that survival isn't just about money. It's about knowing when to bend and when to break. I wasn't rich when I met Frank. I grew up the daughter of a fisherman in Ventura. My father died at sea when I was 19. My mother worked cleaning houses until her hands gave out. Everything I have, I earned. Every inch of that house is a scar I built into something beautiful. So no, I wasn't going to let David and Emily erase me. As I walked along the sand, I found myself smiling for the first time in weeks, because I realized I hadn't told them everything. When Frank got sick, he'd insisted on putting certain documents in a safety deposit box. Not the will he'd said, something else, just in case. At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. He told me not to worry, that he'd left instructions where I'd know to find them. After he died, I couldn't bear to search. I just kept living. But now, standing on that empty beach, I remembered his words exactly. The real foundation isn't concrete. "Ellie, it's in the ledger." The ledger. My heart skipped. There had been an old blue accounting book in his office filled with construction notes and numbers I never bothered to read. I climbed back up the cliff that morning, legs trembling but heart steady. When I reached the garage, I found the door locked, but I still had my old keys. Inside, the smell of cedar and oil hit me like a memory. I walked to his workbench to the top drawer where he used to keep spare nails. There it was, the ledger. Dusty worn with Frank's handwriting across the cover, Carter Projects, 1987-2012. I flipped it open. The first pages were just invoices, receipts, sketches. But halfway through, I found something else, pages marked with red tabs. Dates, property records, small annotations. And then tucked inside one of the pages, an envelope addressed in his handwriting to Eleanor, if things ever go wrong. My hands shook as I held it. I didn't open it right away. I just sat there, surrounded by the scent of sawdust and salt, feeling Frank's presence in every inch of that room. For the first time since losing the house, I didn't feel broken. I felt anchored. They thought they'd taken everything. But Frank and I had built more than a home. We'd built a secret they could never buy. For a long time, I just sat there with the envelope in my hands. My name, Eleanor, written in Frank's familiar scrawl, the ink slightly faded, but still strong. His handwriting had always been neat, confident like the man himself. It took me 5 whole minutes to open it. My fingers trembled as if I were tearing through the past. Inside was a single folded page and a small brass key taped to the corner. I unfolded the note. Ellie, if you're reading this, it means things didn't go as we planned. You know me. I always prepare for the worst, even when you tell me to stop worrying. Remember the trust we set up for Emily when she was in college? I told you it was for her tuition. That was only half true. There's another trust, one she doesn't know about. It's in your name. The house isn't just in our names anymore. I placed it under Carter Family Holdings, a private trust I established in 2009. You're the sole living trustee. The deed they have, if they have one, won't hold up without your consent. All the documents and access information are in a safe deposit box at Ventura Bank Box number 472. Use this key. Don't tell anyone, not even Emily. If she's turned against you, let time reveal who she's become. And Ellie, if someone ever tries to take what's yours, remember this: you built your life twice. You can build it again, but make sure they pay for what they've done. Love, always. Frank, I read it 3 times before it sank in. My breath caught somewhere between disbelief and gratitude. The brass key gleamed in the dim garage light, small, simple, yet heavier than gold. I pressed it against my palm, whispering, "You clever man." For the first time in weeks, I laughed a shaky, tearful laugh that startled even me. Frank had done what I never could. He'd protected me even after death. The next morning, I drove to Ventura Bank. The building hadn't changed much in all these years. Marble floors, the faint scent of lemon polish, the hum of quiet money. The clerk behind the counter looked barely 30. I showed her my ID and the key. She checked her records, then smiled politely. "Of course, Mrs. Carter, box 472 is still active. Please follow me." Still active. We went down to the vault level. The air was cold, sterile, heavy with secrets. She left me alone with the metal box. When I opened it, there were 2 envelopes inside. One labeled legal, the other private. I opened the first one. Inside was a full packet of documents, trust papers notarized and signed by Frank. My name appeared again and again, Eleanor M. Carter, sole trustee, beneficiary, and executor. I skimmed the legal text, recognizing only fragments: revocable trust, limited rights of succession ownership immunity. But one line stood out in bold ink at the bottom: in the event of any attempted transfer or claim against the property by an outside party, all titles revert automatically to the trust until the trustee, Eleanor M. Carter, declares otherwise. My throat tightened. It meant exactly what I thought it did. David and Emily's forged papers meant nothing. The house wasn't legally theirs. It never would be. The second envelope, private, held something even more unexpected: an old USB drive and a short note. "Ellie, if someone's trying to hurt you, this might help. Plug it in. Trust your instincts." I slipped the USB into my purse, locked everything back in the box, and thanked the clerk with a calm I didn't feel. My hands were shaking the whole drive home. When I reached the small motel room where I'd been staying, I plugged the USB into my laptop. It took a moment to load, and then a folder appeared titled Carter Construction Confidential. Inside were dozens of scanned documents, photos and financial ledgers, blueprints, contracts, and audio recordings. Curious, I opened one labeled July 2011, Lawson Contract. David's voice filled the room, younger, sharper, unmistakable. "Frank, come on. If you sign off on the renovation now, I'll make sure Emily gets her cut. We'll keep it quiet. You get your permits, I get my percentage. Nobody loses." Then Frank's voice, calm but firm. "You think I'd risk my license to help you cheat the city? Not a chance, son." There was a pause. Then David again, quieter, colder. "You'll regret that." I sat frozen, listening to the file end in static. That recording alone could destroy David's reputation, maybe even his business. Frank had known exactly what he was doing. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, I'd listened to half a dozen more files. Each one revealed a different thread, shady deals, falsified permits, money that didn't belong to him. It was all there. Proof, evidence, justice, waiting to be unboxed. I leaned back, staring at the flickering motel lamp, and whispered to Frank's photo on my phone screen, "You really didn't miss a thing, did you?" The grief that had been choking me for weeks began to shift, transforming into something sharper, colder. Not revenge, not yet, just purpose. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months, because now I had something David Lawson didn't time truth, and a dead man's hand guiding me. I didn't rush. That's something people never understand about revenge. It's not rage that makes it powerful. It's patience. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise in that small motel room, the ocean hum faint through the window. I made myself coffee in a paper cup and laid out everything on the table. Frank's trust documents, the USB, the letter, the brass key. Each item was a weapon. But like any war, you don't swing the sword too soon. I called Daniel Ruiz, my old lawyer friend. He answered on the second ring. "Eleanor, you sound different." "I am," I said. "I found something." He came the next day, a little grayer than I remembered, but his eyes still sharp as glass. When I showed him the trust papers, he whistled low. "Well, I'll be damned." Frank was smarter than the both of us. "Can they touch the house?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not legally. The moment that fake deed went through the system, flagged it for review. That's why you got that letter from the city office. They probably filed it, but it won't hold. The trust overrides everything, so I still own it." He smiled. "More than that, you never stopped. But don't tell them yet. Let them think they've won." That night, I sat in the dark and thought about his words. Let them think they've won. I could already see it. David bragging to his friends about his oceanfront home, Emily redecorating, rearranging the furniture like she was erasing me piece by piece. Good. Let them get comfortable. Over the next few days, I made myself small, invisible. I didn't call. I didn't show up. I wanted them to think I'd finally given up the fragile old woman fading quietly from the picture. But I watched. Every afternoon, I parked my car 2 blocks away and walked along the beach path below the bluff. From there, I could see my house glowing gold in the sunset. Sometimes I'd see David out on the deck with his phone barking orders, glass of whiskey in hand. Once I saw Emily sitting alone in the living room staring at one of our old family photos. She didn't move for nearly 10 minutes. It hurt to see her like that, torn between guilt and greed. But pity has no place in war. Meanwhile, Daniel got to work. He had a contact at the county records office, someone who could quietly verify the fake deed and trace who filed it. Within 3 days, he called me with the results. "Filed by a notary connected to David's firm," he said. "Classic fraud. We can build a case." "Not yet," I said. "I'm not ready to go public." He chuckled. "You always were the patient one." I smiled. Frank taught me well. That evening, I drove up to the overlook near the house, the same spot Frank and I used to park in when we were still dreaming of buying the land. I sat there with the windows down, the smell of salt and pine filling the car. I thought about how far I'd come, how much I'd lost, and how close I was to reclaiming it all. But before I could do that, I needed to know one thing: how deep Emily was in. So I called her. "Mom." She answered cautious, like my name was a ghost. "Hi, sweetheart," I said softly. "I just wanted to say I understand. About the house." There was a pause. Then she exhaled. "Really?" "Yes. I know you and David mean well. Maybe it's time I start moving on." "Oh, Mom," she said, her tone easing for the first time in months. "That makes me so happy. You'll see this is the best thing for everyone." Her voice cracked slightly at the end, the kind of break you only hear when someone's lying to themselves. Maybe I said, "Could I come by sometime? Just to get a few things?" "Of course," she said quickly. "Tomorrow afternoon, David's working from home, but I'll be here." "Perfect," I replied. When I hung up, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. It was time to go back inside. The next day, I dressed carefully, not fancy, just simple. My late husband's wedding band hung on a chain around my neck, a reminder of why I was walking back into that house. When I arrived, Emily greeted me at the door, forcing a smile. "You look tired, Mom. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said, stepping past her. The house smelled different, colder somehow. My furniture was still there, but the warmth was gone. David appeared at the top of the stairs, laptop in hand. "Back so soon, Eleanor. Just collecting a few things," I said, glancing at him. "Didn't mean to disturb you." He grinned. "No disturbance. You're always welcome here." Welcome. In my own home. I walked through each room, slowly memorizing every detail. The walls, the windows, the way the light hit the floor. I slipped a small recording device into the flower vase by the mantel, one Daniel had given me, just in case he'd said. When I reached Frank's office, I noticed the safe was gone. They'd moved it, probably assuming I'd hidden money inside. Good. Let them chase ghosts. I turned to Emily. "You've redecorated." She smiled nervously. "We're just making it ours." "Of course," I said, forcing a small laugh. Every young couple wants a fresh start. When I left that afternoon, the house behind me looked the same, but I felt different, stronger. Because while they thought I was saying goodbye, I was really saying goodnight. In war, you never announce your strike. You let them fall asleep thinking they've already won. And that night, as I sat by the motel window listening to the ocean roar beneath the cliffs, I whispered to Frank's memory, "They think they're living in victory, my love, but they're only living on borrowed time." 3 weeks passed before they reached out again, long enough for them to believe I'd vanished into my quiet little corner of the world, just another old widow who gave up and moved on. Then one afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from Emily. "Emily, Mom, can you come to the house this Friday? David wants to go over some final paperwork with the lawyer, just to make sure everything's smooth for the transfer." Transfer. She still didn't know the deed meant nothing, or maybe she did and just didn't care. Either way, I said yes. When I arrived that Friday, the weather had turned gray and heavy. The sky hung low over the Pacific, waves beating against the cliffs like a warning. I wore Frank's old coat, the one he used to wear when walking the property lines, the one that still smelled faintly of sawdust and salt. Their lawyer was already there when I entered the house, a man in his 40s with slicked back hair and a briefcase that looked more expensive than his conscience. "Mrs. Carter," he said politely, rising to shake my hand. "I'm David and Emily's legal counsel, Robert Lang." His tone was smooth, too smooth. I'd heard voices like his before, men who make a living off pretending to be kind while sharpening their knives under the table. "Of course," I said, sitting down at the dining table, my dining table, the one Frank and I bought at a flea market and refinished together. David poured himself coffee, looking pleased. "We're just finalizing everything. Robert will file the updated property information today. We wanted you here to confirm just in case there's any confusion." I smiled faintly. "That's considerate of you." Emily looked nervous. She avoided my eyes, fiddling with her ring. There was something brittle in her demeanor, a small crack in her confidence that hadn't been there before. Robert opened his briefcase and pulled out a thin folder. "Now, Mrs. Carter, I understand you've already signed the deed," I interrupted gently. "Have I?" He blinked, confused. "Yes, of course. The document was notarized and filed." "Interesting," I said. Because I don't remember signing anything. David laughed lightly. Come on, Eleanor. We all know you just forgot. You've had a lot on your mind lately. My stomach twisted at the implication, but I stayed calm. You're saying I signed over my house without remembering? Robert cleared his throat. There's no need to get defensive. These things can be complicated. Not that complicated, I said softly, especially when the deed in question is forged. The room froze. David's smile faltered. What did you say? I said. I repeated slowly, the deed you filed was forged. The notary who signed it works for your company, David. I suppose that's a coincidence. Emily's eyes widened. Mom, what are you talking about? I'm talking about fraud, I said evenly, my hands folded on the table, and about how Frank protected me long before you tried to steal what he built. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the waves outside and the ticking of the old wall clock. Robert finally found his voice. Mrs. Carter, those are serious allegations. They're not allegations, I said. They're facts. The property has been under a family trust since 2009. Carter Family Holdings. Frank created it. I'm the sole trustee. The law says no deed forged or otherwise can override that. David slammed his coffee cup down, liquid splashing across the table. That's impossible. We have the papers. Papers that don't matter, I said. You never owned this house, David. You just moved into a lie. Emily's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God. Her voice trembled. You knew. You planned this. David turned to her red-faced. She's bluffing. She's lying. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small flash drive, Frank's USB. I set it gently on the table between us. Frank recorded everything I said. Every conversation you had with him, every deal you tried to push through behind his back. If I were you, I'd watch my tone. David stared at the USB as if it were a live grenade. Mom Emily whispered, tears forming. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted to see who you'd become, I said quietly. I wanted to see how far you'd let him go before you stopped him. Her face crumpled. I didn't know he... Don't, I said softly. You knew enough. Robert cleared his throat, clearly realizing the storm he'd walked into. Mrs. Carter, he said carefully, if what you're saying is true, this entire transaction is invalid. David spun toward him. You're my lawyer. Fix this. I can't fix fraud, Robert said. Not if the trust is active. David's voice rose trembling with panic. This is my house. She gave it to me. I stood slowly. No, David. I offered it to you. There's a difference. You were too greedy to notice the condition. He glared at me, jaw tight. What condition? I smiled faintly. That you'd never live in it. For a second, he didn't understand. Then his face went pale. I picked up my coat. You have until Monday to move out. I've already contacted the sheriff's department and my attorney. The trust owns this property, and the trust is filing a civil suit for fraud. Emily began to sob quietly. Mom, please. I turned to her, my voice soft but firm. You'll always be my daughter. But right now, you need to learn what respect costs. David shouted something behind me. I didn't catch it. I was already walking toward the door, my heels echoing on the tile. Outside, the rain had started. The ocean was wild again, waves smashing against the cliffs below. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the salt and wind before getting into my car. Through the window, I could still see the house lights glowing warm inside, but it wasn't theirs anymore. It never had been. They thought I was just an old woman they could outsmart. They forgot I was Frank Carter's wife, and he never built anything that couldn't withstand a storm. By Monday morning, the story had already begun to unravel, not mine, but David's. He didn't know it yet, but the moment I walked out of that house, Daniel Ruiz had already filed an emergency injunction in court to freeze the property under the Carter Family Trust. It was a quiet surgical move, no shouting, no drama. Just paperwork the same kind David had used to try to ruin me. Only this time, the paper was mine. At 9 a.m., I sat in Daniel's office in downtown Santa Barbara, watching him shuffle documents. It's all here, he said, tapping the folder. The recordings, the trust papers, the notarized proof. The judge will eat this alive. Let's not destroy him, I said softly. Let's just make sure he never wins. He looked up at me over his glasses. That's the same thing, Eleanor. He was right. 2 days later, the hearing began. It was supposed to be a simple civil review, but word travels fast in small towns. By the time we arrived, there were reporters outside. Local businessman accused of property fraud. Cameras flashed as David stepped out of his car, his smile tight, Emily trailing behind him in dark glasses. I walked past them without a word. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy with tension. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and eyes sharp as steel, adjusted her glasses. "Let's proceed," she said. David's lawyer. The same slick Robert Lang stood first. "Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding between family members. My client acted in good faith. Mrs. Carter willingly signed over her property. She didn't." Daniel interrupted. "And we can prove it." He plugged in a USB drive and handed a set of headphones to the court technician. Exhibit A. A recorded conversation between the defendant, Mr. David Lawson, and the late Frank Carter. The speakers crackled, and then Frank's voice filled the courtroom, calm, deliberate. "You think I'd risk my license to help you cheat the city? Not a chance, son." Then, David's voice. "You'll regret that." A ripple went through the room. Even the judge leaned forward slightly. Daniel continued, his tone precise. Exhibit B, proof of forgery. The notary who witnessed the quitclaim deed is a registered employee of Mr. Lawson's construction firm. Same address, same payroll, same insurance provider. He handed the papers to the clerk. David shifted in his seat, jaw tight, sweat forming near his temple. Emily stared down at her hands, her ring glittering in the courtroom light. And finally Daniel said, turning toward the bench, Exhibit C, the Carter Family Trust, established in 2009. The property in question has remained under this trust since inception. Any attempted transfer outside trustee consent is null and void under California law. The judge flipped through the documents. "So, Mrs. Carter," she said, looking directly at me, "you never relinquished ownership of the home." I stood, steadying my voice. "No, Your Honor. I built that home with my husband. My son-in-law tried to take it through lies and forged papers. I may be old, but I'm not blind, and I'm not weak." The courtroom fell silent. David's lawyer sputtered something about miscommunication and clerical error, but the judge wasn't having it. "Enough," she said sharply. "This is fraud. You didn't just deceive your mother-in-law, you attempted to defraud the county recorder's office. That's a criminal act." David's face drained of color. "Your Honor, please. You'll have your chance to speak," she said curtly, "but I strongly advise you to choose your words carefully." Emily began to cry, quietly at first, then shaking. She reached for my gaze, but I didn't give it to her. When the session adjourned, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. Reporters crowded near the doors. David tried to leave through the side exit, but a man from the city licensing board stopped him. "Mr. Lawson, we'll need to talk about your permits." By that evening, his company's website had gone offline. His investors started calling. The press dug up old permits, shady projects, unpaid contractors. Everything Frank had predicted, every warning I had ignored, came to light. 2 days later, I went back to the house, this time with a sheriff's deputy and Daniel by my side. The eviction order was official. David was there when we arrived, disheveled and furious. "You think this means anything?" he shouted. "You'll die alone in that house." I looked at him calmly. Better alone than surrounded by thieves. Emily came to the door, then her eyes red. "Mom!" I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it would go this far. I looked at her, the little girl I once carried on my shoulders at the beach, the one who used to collect seashells and tell me she'd never leave me. "You always had a choice," I said softly. "You just picked the wrong man." She sobbed harder, and for the first time I felt something like pity. Not forgiveness, not yet, but pity. The deputy handed David the papers. "You have 72 hours to vacate." He cursed under his breath and stormed inside. As we turned to leave, Daniel glanced at me. "You did it." I shook my head. "No, we did it. Frank did it. I just followed his map." That night, I walked through the house alone for the first time in months. Every room felt different, lighter, somehow like the walls themselves were exhaling after holding their breath too long. I ran my fingers along the old wood railing still nicked from Frank's tools. The house creaked softly like it was whispering, "Welcome home." When I reached the balcony, the wind hit my face cold, salty, alive. The ocean below was endless and wild, just like Frank used to say life should be. I whispered into the dark, "They wanted your house, love." But they never understood it was never about the house. It was about respect, about love that can't be stolen, about justice that arrives exactly when it's supposed to. And as the waves crashed against the cliffs, I finally smiled, not out of victory, but out of peace. They thought they'd taken everything, but in the end, they were the ones left with nothing. You'd think I'd feel pure joy watching David lose everything. But the truth is, justice doesn't taste sweet, it tastes clean, like rain washing dirt off a road that should have never been muddy in the first place. The weeks after the court ruling were a blur of headlines and phone calls. Local builder faces fraud investigation. Santa Barbara man accused of forging deed. Wife of contractor exposes property scheme. His face was everywhere. On the evening news and online articles on gossip blogs that loved a scandal involving money and family betrayal. The irony was brutal. He'd always wanted fame, and now he had it, just not the kind that paid. His company collapsed in less than a week. Investors pulled out. Clients canceled contracts. The city suspended his building license pending investigation. The bank froze his accounts. When the sheriff's office enforced the eviction order, he tried to stall, claiming emotional distress. The deputy didn't care. They gave him 30 minutes to pack his things. I watched from my car down the hill, the same spot where I used to park and watch sunsets with Frank. David's fancy SUV was loaded with boxes, his designer suits crammed into plastic bags. The sight should have felt triumphant, but what I felt instead was balance. The universe was setting itself right again. Emily came down the driveway last holding a single suitcase. She looked smaller somehow, deflated. When she saw my car parked nearby, she hesitated, then walked toward it. I rolled down the window. The wind carried the sound of the waves, steady and relentless. "Mom," she said softly, "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," I replied. Tears filled her eyes. "I never wanted it to get this far. David said you'd be fine, that it was just paperwork." I didn't think I stopped her with a raised hand. "You didn't think at all." She bit her lip. "He's ruined Mom. They're talking about criminal charges. He might go to jail." I looked past her at the house, gleaming in the afternoon light, my house. "Actions have consequences," I said quietly. "Your father taught us both that." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't expect forgiveness." "Good," I said softly. "Because forgiveness isn't something you expect. It's something you earn." For a long time, we stood there in silence, mother and daughter, both broken in different ways. Then she whispered, "I don't know where to go." I wanted to tell her to come home, but home wasn't just a place anymore. It was something she'd burned when she let David speak for her. "There's a motel off the highway," I said. "Tell them to bill it under my name for a week. After that, you'll figure it out." Her lips trembled. "You do that?" After everything, I looked at her fully, then the girl. I raised the woman who forgot who she was. "I'm not you, Emily," I said gently. "I don't destroy people to feel powerful." She started to cry harder. I didn't reach out. Sometimes mercy hurts more than punishment. That night, I walked through the house again, the echoes of their voices gone at last. Every room felt different, lighter, safer. But when I reached the living room, I found something sitting on the coffee table, a photo frame turned face down. I picked it up. It was a picture of Emily at 10 years old, standing between me and Frank, in front of this very house, her arms around our waists, all three of us smiling. I felt something crack open in my chest, not anger this time, but grief. Grief for the daughter I lost long before the house was ever threatened. I sat down on the couch and whispered, "You'd have hated this, Frank." In my mind, I could almost hear his voice. "No, Ellie, you did what had to be done." Maybe he was right. A week later, the district attorney's office confirmed what we already knew. David had falsified at least 3 property transfers in the past 2 years. The court froze his assets and a warrant was issued for further questioning. Emily called once more, just once. "Mom," she said quietly, "he's gone. He left town last night." "Then let him," I said. "Running doesn't erase guilt." She sighed. I'm moving to San Diego for a while. I need to figure things out. I hope you do, I said. Do you hate me? She asked after a pause. I hesitated. No, I said finally, but I can't trust you. Not yet. Her voice broke. I understand. When the call ended, I sat there in silence, staring out at the sea. The waves kept rolling in steady, endless uncaring. They'd been there before us, and they'd be there long after we were gone. The news coverage died down after a few months. People moved on as they always do. The headlines faded, the gossip quieted, but the damage and the lesson remained. One afternoon, I got a letter in the mail. From the county court, it read, all fraudulent transfers associated with the Carter residence have been permanently voided. Property title confirmed under Carter Family Holdings Trust. Sole trustee, Eleanor M. Carter. I ran my thumb over the embossed seal. It wasn't victory I felt. It was closure. That night I lit a candle on the balcony, the same spot where Frank and I used to sit after dinner. The ocean stretched out before me, glowing silver under the moonlight. I whispered, We made it, Frank. We really made it. Somewhere a gull cried out in the dark, and I swear for just a moment I could feel him there beside me, calm, proud, quiet as the sea. The house had survived. So had I. And the people who tried to take it, they'd learned the same truth Frank always told me. You can steal a name, you can forge a paper, but you can't steal the foundation of something built with love. It'll always stand back up. It's strange how silence can sound different once peace returns. The same waves still crash below the cliff. The same gulls still circle the shoreline at dawn. But now, every sound feels softer, like the house itself is breathing again. It's been 6 months since the court ruling. The dust has settled. The house stands where it always has, stubborn, graceful, a survivor of storms, both weather and human. And me, I'm still here. Every morning I brew coffee in the same chipped mug Frank bought at a yard sale 20 years ago. I walk out onto the balcony, watch the light crawl across the Pacific, and I whisper, Good morning, love. It's not sadness anymore. It's gratitude. I've spent most of my life giving my time, my money, my patience, my love, believing it would always come back to me. It doesn't. That's not how life works. Sometimes love returns in ways you don't expect. Sometimes it leaves and never looks back. But if you give it honestly, it still builds something strong inside you, something no one can steal. Emily hasn't called in months. I hear from neighbors that she's living quietly in San Diego, working at a small interior design firm. I send her Christmas cards, even when she doesn't reply. I suppose that's what forgiveness looks like when you're old, not loud, not dramatic. Just the quiet decision to stop bleeding. David's name still appears in the papers, sometimes whispers of lawsuits, unpaid debts, angry investors. His empire built on arrogance turned to sand the moment truth hit it like a wave. And as for me, I've turned this place back into a home. The garden is blooming again. I planted roses, White Frank's favorite, along the fence. I hired a local boy to repaint the porch railing, but I made sure he left Frank's old hammer marks untouched. They're not flaws. They're memories. Sometimes I host small dinners for the neighbors. People bring casseroles, bottles of wine, and stories. They sit in the same dining room that once echoed with mockery and greed, and now it's filled with laughter again, healing. I've learned is just reclaiming space physically and emotionally. A woman at one of those dinners, a widow named Teresa, asked me once, Eleanor, how did you do it? How did you survive something like that? I told her the truth. By remembering who I was before they tried to tell me who I wasn't. That's the thing about getting older. People start speaking to you like you're fading. But I've realized something powerful. Age doesn't make you invisible. It just makes you harder to fool. There are still moments when I think of Emily as a little girl running barefoot on this very deck, her hair tangled in the sea breeze, her laughter chasing the gulls. I let those memories stay. I won't erase her from this home no matter how much she tried to erase me from it. Because love, real love, doesn't rewrite the past. It just learns to live beside the pain. A few weeks ago, I received a letter. It was from Emily. The envelope was thin, the handwriting shaky. I hesitated to open it. Inside was a single page. Mom, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I think about what I did every day. I see your face every time I close my eyes. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what you were trying to teach me all those years ago. Love isn't ownership. It's responsibility. I'm sorry for forgetting that. I hope someday you'll let me visit again. Emily. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the same box where I keep Frank's note and the brass key. Maybe one day she'll come home. Maybe she won't. But at least now she remembers who she is. That's enough for me. As I write this, the sky outside is streaked with orange and pink, one of those California sunsets that could make even broken hearts feel whole again. The waves are calm tonight and the air smells like rain and jasmine. I think about all the people like me, mothers, grandmothers, fathers, who've been pushed aside, told they're useless, told their time is past. To them, I want to say this. We are not done. We are not invisible. We are the foundation, and foundations never crumble. They hold everything else up, even when no one sees them. I don't need apologies or revenge or money. I just need what I always wanted: respect. And if my story teaches anyone anything, let it be this. Don't mistake silence for weakness, and don't confuse kindness with surrender. The ones who built everything you have, the homes, the dreams, the lives, they are not as fragile as you think. Sometimes the quietest people hold the loudest truths, and sometimes when you try to steal their home, you just hand them the reason to remind the world who they really are. As the last light fades over the ocean, I close the balcony door, turn off the lamps, and whisper one final time to Frank, to Emily, to no one in particular. I didn't need to win. I just needed to stand. The waves answer softly, eternal and steady, and in their rhythm, I finally hear it. Peace.